basically, yeah, Sam, thanks for coming to sit down and speak to me. I appreciate it. I know that you're busy. I kind of wanted to talk to you because I feel like me and you hold a lot of the same values and opinions, especially with with what's going on in society at the moment, where it seems like as every year goes by, it's getting more and more out of control. With stuff like the cost of living and the housing crisis and everything. And I know you're sort of you're a vocal advocate for reform. You're a vocal advocate for change. So thanks for doing that. And I think from my point of view, growing up, I didn't have the sort of the best taste in my mouth for politicians, if you want to say.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was
most people, yeah. I'm sure.
Yeah, well, that's it. I was quite well read up, and I'd read about British politics and American politics and governments, and I was very aware that the remnants of sort of their fingerprints were all over a lot of the atrocities going on in the world. So I took a wide berth, and I thought, yeah, that's not really for me. And I never thought local politics would be too different. And then I saw you a couple of times, on the news, speaking, and I thought that I like what you're saying. I think I'm sort of perspicacious enough to know when somebody's being honest and genuine, and I feel like you're very honest and genuine. And it's nice to just see a politician talk about stuff that I think the majority of politicians would like to avoid. So do you think as well, sorry, before I pass it over to you, do you feel that that sort of palpable divide of me feeling that way, and I don't think it's just me. I think it's a large portion of the community in Jersey. And do you think politicians, especially in the higher sort of level of the government, are aware of that sort of palpable divide, or are they that disassociated that they think the people on the ground, oh hi, we're all happy, everything down here is fine? Do they know? Or?
I think they're genuinely oblivious
Really?
to how they come across and how most people feel about the system. What you've just explained there, you are by no means in the minority there, especially in Jersey, where at the last election, 70% of eligible voters didn't vote. And some people will say, oh, well, that's just because they're perfectly happy and don't care either way what happens. I think there's more to it than that. I think there's a lot of people who aren't engaged for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's because they have been engaged previously and became so disillusioned that they decided to give up. Or some people who looked at it and thought, that's not going to impact on me, that's not going to improve my life, and I don't particularly affiliate with the people who are involved in it. So for Jersey, that's normal, and we as a society have been like that for a very, very long time. You often only really get a mass change of the participation in politics from society when a crisis hits.
Right.
So after the Second World War, for example, in the UK, huge election turnout and big change delivered then. In small territories, when they come under threat, maybe by a natural disaster or something like that, that often provokes people to pay attention and get involved. Jersey, I think in the last few decades at least, hasn't really had that because enough of the population have been comfortable enough. And for a long time, governments just kind of got on with things and weren't particularly bad in most people's eyes. But I think that's changing a lot now, particularly in the last 10 years, where the gap between the richest and the poorest has got bigger. In the last 2 decades, Jersey's economy has flatlined.
Right.
The last 10 years, real terms earnings have also flatlined. And our bills haven't flatlined. They've been continuing to go up. And I think a lot of people are losing faith that Jersey is a place where they might one day have a happy future like our parents and grandparents managed to get.
Most definitely.
And so, I'm optimistic that we are moving to a position where more and more people are recognising that reality, including actually more affluent people as well, who themselves aren't feeling the cost of living crisis that much, but their kids are.
Yeah.
And I meet a lot of people who I would describe as being reasonably affluent, often people that have got investments that bring in income for them and other things like that, who are terrified of their kids leaving the island because they can't afford a home and them never then getting to be a part of their grandchildren being brought up. So they're losing out on the things that money can't buy. So Jersey, for decades, we've had very low participation in politics, but I think we're facing such a difficult time with the cost of living crisis. I think that will start to change.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think there was once upon a time where you'd be so proud to be working class, right? Because it came with so much privilege and reward. You would hold your sort of chest out because at the end of the day, right, we've all got to work. It's just the way, it's the functionalities of society. It's how the cogs move. But it's getting to a point where it's like, you used to sacrifice your time, right? And time's important. Yeah, it's all we have and it's all we need, isn't it? It's all we have and it's all we need. So you used to sacrifice your time. You'd be like, right, that's my sacrifice. But here's my reward. My reward is I can sit comfortably. Now, I might not see my kids all week because I'm out working, but they'll have nice food on the table. I can put them in a house that's big enough that my wife, my husband is not going to be stressed. And, you know, I might have money left over to take them on holiday. But it was a nice house, you know. It was a comfortable way of living. And I think we're sort of losing that. We're losing grasp on that. It's like, here's my sacrifice, but my reward has disappeared. Where is my reward? You know, it's not like with you know, how expensive some of these flats are, and for what you get out of it, it's just it's not exactly good. I know a lot of people who leave work at 5 and start another job at 6 to pay rent, 2 8-hour jobs a day, and it's like, you know. It's disheartening. It's disheartening, I'd say.
The phrase is that you're meant to go out. You're meant to go out and earn a living. Lots of people in Jersey go out and earn poverty because they're not being paid enough to pay their rent comfortably and have food and perhaps a little bit aside to, you know, invest in their future. People who rent their homes in the private sector don't have the security in those homes that even people, you know, 40 years ago might have enjoyed.
Yeah.
And you know, the way the tenancy rules work in Jersey, if you're on a periodic tenancy, a landlord can kick you out of your home with 3 months' notice, and they do not have to give a reason, and there's no right of appeal from it. So a lot of people who are going out to earn their poverty are living in homes that they can't even guarantee will still be their home in 3 months' time, because they can get home and find a letter on the doorstep saying, I'm issuing you notice, and that's that.
Yeah.
And so the way that working class people would have lived their lives decades ago, those things weren't as much issues, because I don't think the greed of today had necessarily set in as much, particularly when it comes to private renting.
Right.
You know, tenancy conditions, you know, okay, they weren't perfect years ago, but you were more likely to have security of tenure than you do now. And if you know you're only 3 months away from ever getting kicked out of your home, you're probably going to tolerate more than you should.
Yeah.
In terms of leaky window or a pipe that's burst or whatever, you're probably not going to cause as much of a fuss as you should, and that impacts on your quality of life as well, because you'll be suffering from that. So in some elements, things are worse than what they used to be.
Yeah. Well, that happened to me, actually, you bringing up that. I lived with my mum and my brother in a flat down in Don Road, and I think the guy sold the building, but he didn't. He ended up just kitting them out and then putting the rent up. But we got a letter through the door that said you have 6 weeks to find a new place, right? Mm-hmm. Which was okay, but it split my family up. Sure. We all had to go separate places. Mm-hmm. My mum had 2 dogs. She couldn't find anywhere else that would take dogs. Mm-hmm. And it was okay, you know, it's not the worst thing to happen to me or us, but it's like, I felt sorry for my mum because we'd been with her for 20 odd years, and she had to say goodbye to both her kids leaving home. Normally it's quite a big thing if your kids are leaving home, right? You know, it's quite like it's meant to be a new chapter, but it was done in quite like a negative manner, because she had nowhere to live, she had nowhere to go, and we all had to split up within a month and find somewhere else to live, and it was abrupt. And I think that's what was like the harsh thing about it. It was so abrupt, it was unexpected, and we were living quite comfortably. We'd been there for 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And that's not normal. In lots of societies, they have a renting culture and renting rules, so that can't happen. You look at places like Austria and Germany, where you have much greater security of tenure. If your landlord has a valid reason for getting rid of you, they've got to give you a lot of notice of it. And if they have like long-term plans for the property, you know, like they want to sell it, or you know, they might want their own kids to move into it or whatever. There's no excuse for only giving someone 6 weeks notice of that. If you're thinking of selling or thinking of having your kids move in, you'll be planning it over a much longer period of time. There's no reason that you can't give longer notice. So in Jersey, it's weird. It's not normal that we have such insecure living conditions when other countries have this completely sorted. And when you rent a home, it is your home and you have rights over it and you can enjoy living there potentially for a very, very long time. One thing I'm really keen to see, when a landlord decides they want to sell their property, at the moment, 9 times out of 10, they'll just kick the tenant out and put it on the market, and hopefully, they'll get a few tens of thousands extra for the fact that it's empty when they sell it. I think we should have a rule in place that if you're going to sell your property, in the first instance, you should be required to offer it to the tenant. And if the tenant can afford a mortgage for it, they should have the first right to come in and buy it and turn it from the home that they rent to the home that they own. Yeah. Again, there's other places that do that. Why can't we do that in Jersey? It'd be a simple law and nobody would be financially worse off from it.
Exactly, and there's a sentimental value to that as well, because you're already living there. You've already got it kitted out in the way that you sort of you try see it as a home, because you go there every night after work, right? You sleep there, wake up there, so you sort of kit it out in a manner. Even if you don't own it, it's just nice to put your little personal touch, because it's where you live. So if first port of call you could give it to those type of people, is that not less hassle for everyone involved?
Indeed, yeah. Indeed, nobody's worse off from it. If you want to sell the property, you can still sell it. And at the end of the day, if the tenant doesn't want it, they can say no, in which case then you sell it to whoever you want.
I know, but at least ask, right? At least ask. It's sort of, it comes down to, it's like we've lost the ability somewhere along the line to just be more humane. And I don't know why. So I guess then, with all of that going on, you may have the knowledge. How one, did it get to come to this place? I'm just going to push that forward a little bit, if that's all right. How did it come to be like that? And two, if you know, what sort of steps or process can we take to mitigate it?
So I don't know how far back you want me to go on this, but I kind of think everything really started with the financial crash in 2007, 2008, where the banks in America and in Europe to an extent as well, had got so greedy that they offered what were called subprime mortgages to people who realistically were never going to be able to afford those mortgages, but they would be able to try to afford them for so long that the banks would make a lot of money out of them in interest payments. And then when it collapsed, they'll just go in and swipe the property back. Right. Really, really greedy. You shouldn't be giving mortgages to people who can't afford them.
Right.
But they were constantly pushing at the boundary of what's acceptable and what's affordable. And then all of a sudden, when a lot of these banks realised that they had taken on too many risky investments, the whole thing collapsed at that point, and the governments had to go in and bail these banks out by billions and billions of dollars. Otherwise, even more people would have lost their homes, or cash machines would have stopped working. People would not have been able to get their money and things like that. So that was a huge economic shock. And after that, governments in America and Britain and in Jersey said, right, we've spent all of this money trying to recover from this shock. We've now got to pay all that money back.
Right.
And rather than asking the people who were responsible for that crash to pay it back, they asked working people to pay it instead. They did that by cutting public services quite badly. Lots of unemployment caused by sacking people who were doing public service jobs. And they thought, well, that's fine, they'll just get jobs in the private sector. But it was a recession. The private sector wasn't creating jobs, so you just got more unemployment. And you have unemployment, well, you have to pay benefits to those people so they don't starve. That costs money. So you thought you'd saved money here, but in actual fact, you were having to spend more here. And that economic tactic of trying to recover from that recession by cutting spending and trying to pay that money back as quickly as possible by putting it on the backs of working people didn't work. Right. And so we're now, 15 years on from then. It's no coincidence that we have had no real terms earnings growth in that time. Economic growth has been stagnant as well. So that whole economic plan was a failure, and we're still paying the price from it. But because it was working people who generally were made to pay for it, not people with lots of money, they're doing great. The income of the richest people in society continues to go up, even in difficult times where the rest of people were suffering. And because interest rates were so low, lots of people who were kind of teetering on the border of being affluent, right? So actually not particularly wealthy, but wealthy enough that they could maybe stump up a deposit for another property, then start investing their money in property, and every rental property or prospective rental property that's bought by an investor, that's a home that the person who lives in it can't own because someone else owns it. So what that did is we became much more unequal in that time, and that I think has had a huge impact, not just in Jersey, but in America and Britain and other places too. And we are still led by people who don't seem to realise that none of that worked, that it didn't help us recover quicker. It didn't create better lives. We didn't see the mass growth in the private sector taking on the jobs or creating the jobs that people had suddenly lost. And a lot of people, to make ends meet, started then innovating with their employment practices by creating things like 0 hours contracts, which weren't really a thing before then. You know, you had some flexible working, but the idea that your boss could ring you at 7 o'clock in the morning and say, don't come in today, I haven't got any hours for you and you won't be getting paid either, means people struggle to pay their rent. It's terrible for the benefits system. You know, if somebody has got a low paying job and they need benefits to help them make ends meet, if their income is steady, it's really easy to calculate what benefits you need to give them. If you're on a 0 hours contract and your income goes up and down, it's impossible to work out how much you need. And that causes all sorts of bureaucratic problems, which we suffer from quite badly in Jersey with people who really, really end up in poverty because they're not getting enough to survive. So that's how all this happened. But you asked about how do we overcome it, and that is the question. And so when I was 22, I think. So if this was a few years after that crash, and I could observe at that point that things were going really badly, and I could observe that our politicians in the UK and in Jersey were both totally signed up to the austerity plan to try to fix the situation from that crash. I thought, well, if there's nobody out there fighting for the alternative, we need to find those people. We can't just... We're a democracy at the end of the day. We get the governments we pick. It's not like we live in a complete dictatorship where you'll get shot if you have a different perspective. We are allowed different perspectives, and we can go and vote for something different if we want to. But you have to create that alternative for people to believe in. And I just thought, well, if nobody in Jersey is doing it, why don't I try?
Yeah.
And I know that there are like-minded people. I know that there are people who understand that growing inequality is unsustainable. And I know that there's decent people who, if push came to shove, would come out and vote for change. But how do you galvanise them? How do you let those people know that there is an alternative, it is worth voting for, and bring people together to fight for it? So that's why we founded Reform Jersey, to be that body that would build that alternative. Right. And it's taken us a long time to get to where we are, but we have constantly been moving forward in that time. So we've been going for 10 years now. Where will we be in another 5 years or another 10 years? We might be in control by then, if our trajectory carries on the way it is. And then Jersey would have a government that looks totally different from any that it's ever had before. And maybe that's our chance to do something different for Jersey.
Cool. So would you say like the inclination or the trajectory of your growth, is that because more people are starting to pay attention? Do you think that's because it's gotten so far out of hand that people are coming out of the woodworks and saying, actually, I'm going to start paying attention to politics, I'm going to start paying attention to what Sam's saying? Is your growth due to more people's ears perking up?
I think it's a combination of two things. One of those things is those people who haven't actually been particularly harmed by what's happened in the last 15 years since that crash have started worrying about other people more. They've become more empathetic.
Right.
And a lot of that is down to people worrying about their kids and their kids' futures.
Sure.
And wondering, I mean, I look at my parents who both left school. They were working class kids. They didn't go to private school, didn't go to university. But by the time they were 26, they owned a 3-bedroom semi-detached house with a garden, parking space, were planning to have children, and then a couple of years later, my mum could give up work. Their children don't have that opportunity.
No.
It's just it's economically not possible, and it's not because we're stupid and lazy. We're not stupid and lazy. We're actually better educated than our parents were, and we're hardworking. but those opportunities aren't there for us. So a lot of people who benefited from the economic situation decades ago now look at it through their children and are worried about that. So I'm finding that even though my policies are geared towards helping working class people more than anyone else, a lot of people who are further up the economic chain are a lot more sympathetic than they were previously. So that's one of the things that's really important.
That's nice to hear as well.
Indeed, yeah. And when I in election campaigns and I go knocking on doors, and sometimes I go up to big houses and I think, is this? I'll knock on the door because you got to fight for every vote.
You got to try.
And the amount of people who would open the door and go, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with everything you're saying, but I think you're trying to push in the right direction, so I'm going to give you a chance this time.
Perfect.
The other thing though, and this is the difficult one, is it's not just good enough to have a nice guy who says the right things and go, oh yeah, I'll give them a vote, they seem okay. That's not good enough, because the problems aren't to do with the personalities, they're systemic. So we have worked very hard to organise ourselves as well as possible to form an alternative that has the capacity to actually run the island effectively and not just be a protest group that suddenly finds itself with power, because there's loads of important things we need to protest about and have our voices heard, but we shouldn't just be aiming to have an angry rally in the Royal Square to say how terrible things are. We should be aiming to go into the government offices on Broad Street and start running things and know that we don't just know what's wrong, we know how to fix it, and we know what's right, and here's what it is, and this is what it looks like. It will cost this much, we'll be able to do it by this day, this is the law you've got to change, to have all of that detail and understand it properly. The ordinary person on the street doesn't need to be on top of all of that detail, but the people who are running for election do.
Sure.
So we've had to work very hard to find the most capable people we can, work with them, come up with those alternatives, train them to know how they can hit the ground running if they were to be elected, and what they do when they get in, and say to the island, look, you can trust our team. Our team, as well as having the right values, they're capable and they're intelligent and they'll be able to do a good job if you let them in. It's not just like, giving the keys to Broad Street to a protest group. It's more than that. So I think that those are two really important things. A good organisation that is well developed, has credible policies, can tell you where all the money is coming from, and also a wider consciousness in society that something's not right. If we're constantly becoming more and more unequal, that's not a good direction to travel. Something's got to change at some point.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you're saying, that's probably the quickest way to garner people's attentions is honesty. People don't want bull anymore. People don't want lies anymore. They want to be able to look at someone and go, the honesty, this is where your money's going. Here. Not the seedy sort of behind the scenes sort of stuff. Or where's all that money gone? Oh, sorry, we spent it on this or we spent it on that. There's just a more honesty, I think, would have the public's opinion more more wanting to deal with politics and politicians. So I guess then, do you feel as, somebody, you're obviously quite, from your associates, need to clear my throat, from your associates in the States and that, are you met them, because you're obviously quite against the grain, right? And you're quite outspoken and you speak about stuff that people don't like to hear. Are you met with a lot of conflicting opinions from the people you're meant to be working with?
Yeah. So, I'm lucky because of how hard we've worked in the last 10 years. I've got a really good team of people around me who we get on with each other really well. We're like a family. Yeah. We support one another and all the stuff we do behind the scenes to work together. So that's an absolute joy. And I know that I'm working with a group of people who are on the same wavelength as me. But there's 39 other politicians who aren't part of Reform Jersey. And they're a mixed bunch. And some of them are perfectly decent people who've gone into politics for the right reasons, who want to serve their community. And good for them. I don't suggest there's any problem with them or their integrity. But let's be frank, there are politicians in there who are totally out of touch with reality, and it's because they live lives that are totally different to how most people in Jersey live them. And we have this every time we have a debate on anything to do with changing the rental laws. You're required as politicians to declare any conflicts of interest at the start of a debate. So if you have any financial interest in something, you've got to declare it. And every time we do something on the rental laws, every member who's a landlord has to stand up and declare it. And we're normally just sat there laughing because of how long it takes.
Rise.
Yeah, indeed. And they all have to say so. And some of the things people say, I remember one interview with a politician where someone, the interviewer said, well, you're a landlord on this, so, aren't you conflicted on this? And she went, I only own a small number of properties. I said, well, good for you. I don't even own one.
A number, says it all, right?
A small number, great. Yes. Yeah. Well, seemingly to think that, that's not a big deal. Everyone owns a small number of properties, don't they? Well, no, most people don't even own one. So some of them really are out of touch. But I think for a lot of them, politics is something you go into to satisfy yourself because you feel really important. You get invited to, all of these black tie dinners. You get Christmas cards every year from really important people. I get Christmas cards every year from the Lieutenant Governor, from the bailiff, from the heads of the church groups and stuff like that. Oh, you feel important. You get all this stuff, and some people like that, and they don't realise that that's not actually what it's about. Yeah. Okay, if you're in politics, you're going to get treated as an important person, and people are going to want to cozy up to you to try to influence you. But that's not because you're brilliant. It's because you just happen to hold the title for a period of time. If you lost that title, they'd forget you instantly and move on to other people. And I think some people get taken in by that too much, and they start to believe their own hype. And when they're surrounded by people who say, oh, yes, Minister, you're doing a wonderful job, Minister, they buy into it.
Hello, ego.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And when you hold a mirror up to them and say, do you realise what you're saying comes across as actually very out of touch and not, people listening to this don't relate to it, they just don't understand.
They're just that clueless.
Yeah, and if you try to say that to them, you're being a troublemaker. Why are you being so adversarial? Why can't you just be a team player? And it's like, well, my team is Jersey. It's not a small group of privileged people who have a title for a few years and could be here today, gone tomorrow.
They look at you as like the naughty kid in the class, right?
Yeah, I had a really, really funny conversation with the housing minister recently who, he and I have very different perspectives of what needs to be done to resolve Jersey's housing crisis. And, he told me how annoyed he felt that I was never constructive with him. I said, I've literally brought about 6 propositions to the States Assembly in the last year and a half on rental stuff. What do you mean I'm not being constructive? I'm actually trying to be constructive. It's you who says no to everything. I do. So what he wants is for me to just shut up and say he's doing a brilliant job.
Well, that's it. That's some people's delusion is that you're problematic because you're not agreeing with me. The sooner you agree with me, then you're not being problematic. You're not being conflicting. But you're being constructive by giving 6 or 7 ideas instead of just agreeing with the one. But I bet if you quickly said, I agree with your idea, you're not being problematic anymore, are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, it's difficult. So I thought it might have been, because I guess I would want to know why those people are so out of touch. Is there an element of the fact that, some of their processes are so archaic, right? Or have lost its way as time has gone by, that for them to sort of step back and say, we need to make change, is to go against their own processes, one, which is an ego thing. Some people don't want to do that, right? And another is that it's like, you have to admit your faults at some point. Mm-hmm. And would that be hard for some politicians to say, I know we've stuck by this idea for 5, 6, 7 years, right? It obviously didn't work, hasn't been working. We need to admit that and change it. Do you think some of them have the knowledge of that and they're just scared to admit we made a mistake?
I think in Jersey politics in particular, because we don't have full party politics like most jurisdictions, you end up with some people getting into power as government ministers who haven't been through years of working themselves up the ladder and working in a party structure, learning about policy, learning what alternatives are and how they could be. So when they get made a minister, they suddenly find that they've got the same civil servants who've had those jobs for the last 10 years are now their advisors, the ones who are advising predecessors who are getting things wrong. They're the same people behind the scenes supporting those ministers, but they also find that suddenly vested interest groups will try to lobby them quite heavily. And I think they don't realise they're being lobbied. I think they think, oh, this is just good people in our community trying to offer me some genuine helpful advice. And so because they're not well equipped as visionary politicians with a great plan for change, when they end up sat in a room with business people who have been doing very well out of a particular policy or a particular rule for years, they take their word for it too much.
Right.
And the great example of this is the building developers,
Sure.
who of course they want to get planning permission, they want to build things, they want to get on with it and make money, of course, and that's fine. But most countries have a rule where if you're giving planning permission for a new block of housing, a percentage of those houses have to be reserved for affordable housing. It's quite a common rule in most places in the world. Jersey has only just got a kind of minor version of that rule in place, and all the developers hate it. And so you occasionally get some of the ministers who go, "Oh, we've got to be careful with this. The developers don't like it." The minister should be saying, well, of course they're not going to like it, because it's a rule that ultimately is going to make their development slightly less profitable. So of course they're not going to like it. So you can listen to them, you can bring them in and sit with them and have that cup of tea and say, tell me what you think of this policy and I'll think about it. But when they say, we don't like this policy, you don't say, oh, do you not? Oh, we better scrap it then.
Right.
No, you push back. You say, well, why don't you like it? Well, you don't like it because more affordable housing means you won't be able to make as much profit. But we need more affordable housing, though. So sorry, but on this one, we're going to have to agree to disagree, and we're going to still implement it anyway. Most ministers don't have the strength to do that. They end up in a room with those people in suits who are, very wealthy and powerful in their industries, and they cave in very quickly.
They don't have that sort of backbone that that would be necessary to hold that sort of title and come back with at least some sort of rebuttal to say, actually, no, we need to put this. So they feel the pressure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the bigger problems that arises as a result of that is because they are too scared to stand up for a policy or advocate for it. It means they don't advocate for it. And in the wider public consciousness, if you're never exposed to an argument on something, it's no wonder that more people won't then recognise that argument if they've never heard it before. But if they are exposed to it, a lot of people start going, okay, maybe that makes sense, I'll give that a think. And you might convince people. And that's why social media has been so important in the last 10 years, because anybody can go on it and put out an argument. And we can hear arguments and conclude that they're nonsense, but there's a lot of issues that are completely ignored by politicians that ordinary people can put out on social media, and it does change people's minds because they hear it, get exposed to it and consider it, and sometimes they conclude that it's right. So that democratic discourse happening more in Jersey would be a good thing. And I think some of the housing crisis debates we've had in the last few years have been particularly good on social media, because it's not just a room full of politicians saying, crisis? What crisis?
Right.
Everyone on social media recognises that it's a crisis. And so they have now totally burst that bubble for politicians.
Right.
And that's a really healthy thing.
It's funny that that's the way it works, right? That, the result and the impact, the consequence of that person over there not being able to find their voice in a room full of people leads to XXX amount of people not being able to afford homes or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's crazy that the knock-on effect of that is that, which just seems worlds away, right?
Yeah. I think we also, I think a lot of politicians, because they are kind of in it for the prestige and like feeling important, they also see it as their job to try to please everyone.
Right.
And they think, if only we, if we can get this group together with this group and meet up, and we'll find something in the middle, a compromise, and that will leave everyone happy. And I think they often don't realise is sometimes there is no middle point. If one side believes something is black and the other side believes it's white, the answer isn't it's grey.
Right.
As sometimes there are objective answers, and the middle point is not necessarily right, even if it feels nice to compromise with people and come to an agreement. So, we often get housing ministers particularly saying, I want to try to find a solution that both landlords and tenants can agree with. It's like, well, good luck.
Yeah,
because they have diametrically opposed interests.
Well, one's money. and one's trying to help.
Indeed,
people.
and this is for perfectly decent reasons. A landlord's interests are that they spend as little as possible on their properties, but make as much rent out of them as possible. A tenant's interests are that their landlord spends as much money as possible on the property and charges as little rent as possible. The interests are diametrically opposed. There's no middle point there. And on some issues, sometimes you have to decide, we're going to be on these people's side. Sorry to you who have lost out this time, but that's democracy. But we'll side with who we think is right on this occasion. And a lot of ministers are too scared to do that.
Is that the scarcity that they have? Is it like the if we start saying no to them, then in the future when it comes to when we need them or when we require them to do more building for us, they're going to turn around and say no, or that they're going to charge us more money in the long run to do jobs for us now because we had that little tit for tat at some point. Like, what is their fear?
Yeah, so they say, we're concerned about the long-term economic consequences, the unintended consequences as well, which I get. And, if you can do an economic study on something to work out, if your policy is on the right lines or not, like obviously it's better to do that if you can. But in Jersey, I think it's often used as an excuse to do nothing.
Is that not just kicking the can down the road?
Yeah, it is. So, we couldn't possibly do that without a consultation. Oh, no, we're going to have to review that first. And so a decision that could have been made very quickly, and then if it turned out to be the wrong decision, could be reversed very quickly. That decision ends up being stretched over a year, in which case, if it takes a year to do it, well, it's going to take a year to fix it if it's the wrong thing. Whereas if governments were more agile and would make decisions quicker, occasionally you'll get something wrong and you'll have to fix it, but you might get a lot right. So to get something right in a week versus to get it right over a year, well, it's obviously better to get it right in a week because you save all that time and you can benefit from the results of that as soon as possible. But our politicians tend to try to outsource decision making as much as possible to consultants, to reviews. There's been some incredible ones recently with sports policy where I think on 2 occasions in the last year and a half, the sports minister has commissioned reviews into particular aspects of sports policy. One of them was on elite sports and travelling for sports people. Obviously really important. We want sports people on the island to represent the island internationally if we can, and you've got to, financially support people to go away and do that. And they did this review and, it came up with some recommendations of what we could do to support sports people more. And the number one recommendation was to appoint a new civil servant. And the government went, okay, we'll do that. Yeah. So that's now someone getting paid 50 grand to sit in an office. And that's not actually directly helping sports people. Wasn't that the point of the review, was to come up with policies to support sports people so that,
we're wasting time.
Spend money on a consultant to tell us we need another civil servant. I mean, for goodness sake, we'd have been better off giving that money to a sports club and saying,
I know,
so
right?
take your team off Ireland and have represent us.
Is there no, I'm just going to do something quickly out there. I always just check once every episode because it's just
imagine, yeah.
Yeah, I know, it's just typical. But I was going to say, is there no once you're in that position of power then, I guess, are you just clear of any sort of legal consequences or criminality? Because take, for example, what happened with the hospital, right, and the consultation behind that, which was, you may know the figures, I'm not too clued up on this precise figures, but where there was millions spent on consultation fees to learn that the hospital... Where should it go? Oh, actually, it's best off being where it is now. As a working class person who pays tax, and everyone, we all pay tax, right? To say, do you know how much millions got spent on the hospital?
Oh, it's about 115 million. And
100. See, I thought you were going to say 5, 6, 7 million.
No. And they're asking for another 52 million for next year to carry on it. Yeah. And
we're still not even out the park,
still
right?
haven't laid a brick, yeah.
Still haven't laid a brick. So you start thinking... somebody is even, if I'm not saying people should be put in prison for it, but that's at least the loss of a job somewhere, right? That's at least, oh, you're going to have to be fired, mate, because, the society cannot waste that sort of money. We need it for XXXXX. We've just spent it on Y. It's down the drain. We've wasted it. That's not good. You can't work here anymore, mate. I don't know who it was or what it was. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody because I don't have a clue. But from an outside perspective, it's like, Is that allowed?
So I think this is a great example of Jersey politics not working and it contributing to huge wastes of money. So this has been going on for a very long time. I think it was about 2012 where the then health minister said, we need a new hospital. The one we've currently got, as brilliant as it is in many respects, is just not going to last forever. We will need a plan to change it. And she came up with an iteration of a plan. 2014, there was an election. That government who was elected then spent their 4-year term coming up with plans for a new hospital that was going to be on the same site. 2018, there was an election. New government came in. It was a different chief minister to the previous one who went, before we commit to this, I think we need to have a review just to make sure before we sign that check for this project, which is going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds, we want to make sure we've got it right. So we'll have a review. Or was the site the right one? Or let's have a look at, what would alternative sites look like? Oh, actually, this site might be better than that. Okay, well, let's start planning for that. And then what happens, you get to 2022, and just as they're about to finally agree it, there's another election. New chief minister comes in and says, I think we need to review. It's the cycle. So because it takes so long to come up with the plan, it takes at least 4 years, and the electoral cycle is 4 years, the first thing the new government does is cancel the plans to the old government, start it over again, take 4 years, and then the new government does exactly the same thing. So, we have spent over £100 million on nothing. That is money that could have been gone on reducing waiting lists, to giving people better support to go off island for complex treatment when they needed it. Putting it into our mental health facilities would be a good use of money for that as well. And imagine what we could do.
Crying out for that.
And instead, that has been spent on architects, on health consultants telling us, this ward needs to be next to that ward in any new design you come up with, that kind of thing. And then repeating the process over and over again. Whereas imagine if 10 years ago we had a proper government with party politics, so they'd have gone to the public and said, look, if you vote for us, this is what we're going to do on the hospital. If you like it, vote for us. If you don't, vote for someone else. But if they were elected, because the public have deemed, okay, on balance, we like that, they could get it started in a year. They wouldn't need 4 years, in which case, rather than spending 4 years planning, you're spending 1 year planning and 3 years doing. Much, much better use of time and money for the public. And we'd have a hospital already built by now, right, if they'd have done that. And as the longer that's gone on for, inflation has, the cost of materials and construction has constantly gone through the roof as well. Yeah. So, the last plan for a hospital was meant to cost about £800 million. The new government is now reviewing it and coming up with alternative plans. I bet you theirs will be more expensive. So if we'd have just gone ahead with something years ago, all that money we would have saved that could have gone on actual health services rather than bricks and mortar or architect fees or whatever.
It sounds like a snake chasing its tail of thing, isn't it? Running around in circles. Can they not? Is that sort of foreshadowing not seeable for them though?
Yeah.
Or do they just they don't care enough to? It's not like we have the money to waste. So how's there not precautions put in place for them to say, if we mess around like this, it's going to lead to the loss of millions of pounds. We can't afford to. Let's get it right first time. Huge thing. I work at a bank. Getting things right first time is like the Bible of working in a bank, right? And I thought, wasting millions and millions of pounds, getting it right first time would be a priority, or at least first, second time, or whatever, but soon.
Sure, but again, with our political system, because we don't have full party politics, and when we have an election, so apart from Reform Jersey, which is the main party that exists and keeps going, you tend to get the odd sacrificial lamb at an election. So if lots of things had gone wrong, people tend to find a politician to blame it on, and maybe that person will lose and won't get re-elected, or more likely they'll see that the writing's on the wall and just not stand again. Meanwhile, the 9 people who are sat around them egging them on get away with it. And because it's not because when they fight their elections, they do it as individuals rather than as a team, they can pretend they weren't in the team that made those decisions. And it's so hard to hold them to account. You know, there are politicians who in every term of office have voted a different way on something, and it all depends on what team they're in at the time. Or so if you decided, you know, this government really has wasted too much money on the hospital, and at the next election we're going to punish them by kicking them out, you might actually just be kicking them out for someone who's mates with them, because you don't know, it's just one name versus another name. And that's why the party politics is important, because if we had, you know, a Jersey Conservative Party, Reform Jersey, you know, Jersey Liberal Party or whatever, every candidate would have to say which one they're aligned with. And if you knew which ones you didn't like, you know, even if their candidate's nice, don't vote for them, because their policies you won't agree with.
I understand. Yeah, I didn't know that, actually. I'm learning that for the first time. So there's like there's an individuality to it that affects the whole thing.
Yeah.
People aren't grouped together as you would think the way you see it in the UK.
Yeah. Generally, yeah. Reform Jersey's the main exception to that, and we are trailblazing in that sense here. And it's taken us 10 years to get to where we are.
Right.
A lot of hard work and perseverance.
Yeah.
But yeah, most other politicians, it's just names on a ballot paper.
Yeah.
You know, you replace one with another, it doesn't mean anything.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I did write one of your quotes down from a website that I wanted you to explain to me, which sounds kind of like what you're talking about. When it comes to Reform Jersey, it says, "We are currently the biggest party in the State's Assembly and stand as the only alternative to successive generations of conservative governments in Jersey." That sounds quite important, but I'm not clued up enough to be able to explain that. So what does that mean?
Sure. Okay. So politics is not just about people trying to be nice and saying, oh, you know, I'll listen and I'll try to be collaborative. Politics is not an approach. Politics is about the actual things you believe in, the philosophy behind it, and not everyone believes in the same things. So conservative politics, liberal politics, socialist politics are not the same thing. They believe very different things. And you know, throughout history, there's been other, you know, types of politics, communist politics, fascist politics, and what have you. There's all sorts of different ways of thinking. Conservative politics, which I would define as politics which is more based on the individual as opposed to society as a whole, and wanting government to get out of the way, keep taxes low, and let people look after themselves, as opposed to socialist politics, which is more about us all together rather than as individuals, and saying perhaps taxes should be a bit higher, but we'll provide really good services in exchange for those taxes. So the great example of those two different politics in action is healthcare. If you look at America's healthcare system, which is a very conservative system, government provides very little. It's all privately done. If you get sick, you're paying a big bill for it. Compare that to the NHS in the UK, which is a socialist healthcare system.
Right.
It's all free at the point of need, but you pay for it through your taxes.
Right.
And you know, that's I think the two philosophies quite clearly demonstrated there. Jersey has pretty much had conservative governments for a very long time, since the Second World War, really. And they kind of don't really admit it because they run as individuals rather than as a party. They don't run as the Jersey Conservative Party. They just run as, you know, Mr. LeSueur or you know, Mrs. Viber or whatever. So I think they run for election kind of pretending to be a little bit more liberal than they otherwise would be. So the other thing with conservative politics is that on social policy, they tend to be more conservative as well. So a lot of the progressive movements in recent years, same-sex marriage, you know, that kind of thing, that's more been from the socialist side than the conservative side. So they've pretended, I think, to be a bit more progressive, but then when they get elected, they just govern as conservatives. They don't really spend much money on services.
Sure.
You know, you have to pay to see a doctor in Jersey. You know, a lot of societies you don't have to pay for that because it's all sorted out through your taxes. So Reform Jersey is not a conservative party by any stretch at all. We're much more like what you'd find in the Labour Party or the Green Party, or we're much more progressive and more towards the socialist side of things. So that's how our policies are built. You know, we've got very clear policies on what we'd like to see with tax. You know, we'd like the richest people in Jersey to pay a bit more tax, and we would use that to make seeing doctors free. We would use it to fund higher education to a better extent, so people who want to go off to university aren't going to go into thousands of pounds of debt for it. But we're organised because we're not just a handful of random people who go, oh yeah, I prefer socialist politics to conservative politics. We're actually an organisation that has sat down and said, right, in Jersey, what does that actually look like? What would we need to change to the health system to get it how we want it to be? What would we have to do for housing policy to do that? So we're organised and we're clear about what we stand for. And at the end of the day, if you don't like it, don't vote for us.
Yeah.
And that's a great reason for not voting for us. If you hear what we say and you think, that doesn't align with my values, great, don't vote for us.
Yeah.
We're not going to pretend. We're not going to lie to you and say, oh, no, you should still vote for us.
Because
and then come up,
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and then just come up with some nonsense. We can't get away with that because we have it very clear. Our website says what we stand for, so we can't lie about it. Other politicians who know that they're conservative, if they knocked on a door and somebody said, oh yeah, I'm trying to work out who I'm going to vote for. I don't want to vote for any of these conservatives though. That individual has a perfect opportunity to lie to them and just say, yeah, no, I know I'm more this way myself personally, and then get voted in. And then when they're in, they just behave like a conservative.
No one really knows what they voted for. They've been led down an incorrect path. It's sort of a lie because you just you're taking them at face value, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't know if they're being honest or not.
Indeed, there's no accountability. Whereas with party politics, you can't lie. It's literally on your rosette. Where when you see the colour on the rosette, you know exactly who you're talking to. And I've had it before. I've knocked on doors and people have said, thanks for taking the time to come and see me, but I'm actually quite conservative, so I probably won't be voting for you guys. And I go, fair enough. Yeah. Well, at least that's perfectly good reason.
Yeah. I'll move on to the next house.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. That if we had that across the board in Jersey, it would totally transform our politics, because you would get a lot of people who are much more conservative than the public realise they are not getting re-elected because people may have got the impression they were more progressive than they actually were.
Right.
And so people could vote with more transparency and accountability than knowing actually what they're getting, and it makes it easier for them to change their minds in future.
Well, that's it, right? But there's more transparency. So
absolutely.
You could look at someone and say, I voted for this person. I'm seeing in real time that their policies are not working. I gave them a shot for 2 or 3 years. They obviously aren't the people I should be voting for. I'm going to jump ship now. Yeah. But you don't have the opportunity to say I'm going to jump ship because you're like, well, who's making the mistakes? I don't know.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the other thing I think that's important to say about this as being the alternative is if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, Reform Jersey carries on. It's got the same policies. Somebody else would step up into my position. They would run it just as well as I think I have been since we founded it. It would carry on without me. So I'm kind of inconsequential for that. Something could happen to me and we'd be okay. Because that organisation exists, they can go out recruiting people and say, well, if you believe in what we stand for, come and join us.
Yeah.
And maybe in a few years' time, if you fancied running for election, we can help. We can train you. We can go out with you and promote you and do that all together, where we're much stronger than if we're doing it individually. So that's why the organisation and it being the alternative is I think so much better than just leaving it to chance by everybody running as individuals and not really being honest about what you stand for.
It makes sense. And I start to wonder how many people are aware of that. I'm learning this for the first time. I didn't really know it was structured in that sort of way.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, the other people that vote, are they knowledgeable of the fact that's the way it's run behind the scenes? I'm not too sure. I know I certainly was, and I doubt most of the people that I know, which is hopefully why this is going to be helpful, because I want people my age to be a little bit more clued up, because it's affecting us in real time, and as the years goes on, it's affecting us worse and worse. And, and I do think about my mum, and I do think about my brother. My brother's left because he can't handle it round here anymore and stuff like that. But so I guess then, if we go on to, Reform Jersey, what's its sort of main goals, or what's it trying to implement in the future, because I know I've been on the website and I tried to read your manifesto, And I know you can go on there, which is, if anyone's interested, it's reformjersey.je. Yeah, so you can read the manifesto there. You can read some of your values on there, right? But just from you, what's sort of like the next few years attempting to look like, or what's the plans? You know, I know they're only propositions and not everything's set in stone, but what does that sort of look like?
So the headline is that we want to be a more equal society, and that means trying to bridge the gap between the richest and the poorest. It means trying to improve our public services for people who need to rely on them to have a decent life. That's it in a nutshell. That's what we believe in and what we strive for. But we've worked to look at practically what does that mean for Jersey, and we kind of think the biggest and most important thing that we could do to implement that vision for equality in Jersey is to fix the housing crisis. It is the number one thing that is, I think, risking Jersey's future prosperity, because if our young people don't feel like they've got a future here because they don't think they'll be able to afford their housing, more and more of them will go. That'll be bright, talented, hardworking, aspirational young people who could be working here and making money and making that prosperity, who will be doing it somewhere else because they couldn't afford the housing here. It means pensioners who've worked hard all their lives retiring and finding they're in poverty because they can't afford the rent. They weren't able to buy whilst they were working, so they're in poverty. If they're in poverty, that means the benefit system has to pay for them. Who pays for the benefit system? Well, it's other people who are working, so that's the tax burden that has it all. It's all circular here. Rojo's has just announced that it's going to be closing, and I'm absolutely gutted about that. I think of other nightclubs that we've lost in the past, and a lot of them will say it's because our costs are going up. Our staff are quite rightly demanding better pay because they can't afford their housing. So we either have to increase our prices to be able to pay our staff more, which means our customers are going to be struggling to afford what they could before, or staff are just going to quit because they won't get decent standard of living for the money that they're getting paid. It's all circular. So all of these other businesses are suffering as a result of that, and people will just pack it in. Yeah, go ahead.
What you're saying is exactly true, because it gets to a point where they just got to say, you know, I don't want to be doing this, but I need to hold my hands up and admit defeat, which I think is what Rojo's and places have done. Yeah. It's like, we would love to have our viable option to be where we carry on this nightclub, we house it, because it's a busy place, man. There's so many young adults that go there every single Saturday and Sunday, Friday, or whatever. And you know, and it's like, and that's the downtime, isn't it, for people my age? They know if we're working hard, we want something to do on the weekends. You know, we're not out there misbehaving, causing trouble all the time. It's just people like to socialise. You like to socialise. I like to socialise. A lot of people love music, right? But it's not them saying, oh, you know, we just don't want that for kids anymore, so we're just going to close Rojo's. It's whoever's managing it, whoever's owning it, saying, I can't do this. It's hindering my own life. It's hindering my finance, and it's the ship's sinking. Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And I am an optimist. I think we can fix the housing crisis. I just think you need a government that has the guts to do it, and it needs to stand up to the vested interests, and it needs to have a clear plan. So in our manifesto, we were very clear about what we think needs to happen to resolve the housing crisis, and it means. It means reserving more homes for young people to buy when there are new developments. It means not using publicly owned land to build investment properties for people to rent out at extortionate prices. It means having rent control. It means increasing the amount of social housing and making that more widely available, because social housing is not run for profit. So the model is very, very different. All of this stuff is totally feasible. There are other places in the world that have systems that work well. Singapore, in I think like the 1970s or something, their government just decided we're going to be a home-owning society, and then over the next few years it built loads of homes, and it has particular ownership models for the people who live there. So most people in Singapore own their own home, and the government helps them to do it. Contrast that with Vienna in Austria, where it's almost the opposite. Most people rent their homes, but they're really good rental homes. They're affordable. They're taken care of really well. They have life enjoyment in those properties, so they can't just get kicked out. If they lost their job and were struggling to pay the rent, the government would help them. So, different models there, but they both work, and they both provide decent standards of living for people. Jersey could so easily do that if we decided. I mean, I look at the waterfront where the suggestion is that they want to build 1,000 homes on there. The government could very easily say, we're going to make 1,000 young people between the ages of, 24 and 32 homeowners on that scheme. That's going to be our vision for it.
Yeah.
Imagine what we would do to our society if we took 1,000 of our young people and said, the government is going to make you homeowners. So, okay, there won't be, 3-bed semi-detached place with a garden and a parking space. It will be a 1 or 2 bedroom flat, but that's your foot on the ladder.
It's a start.
You then move on to what you want to when you're ready afterwards, but the government will help you get there on that first step. Why is it so difficult to come up with a vision to do that? Instead, the plan is that they'll build all of these homes, a meagre proportion of them will be affordable, and lots of them will probably end up going to investors in the long run. So where does that get us? It'd be so easy for the government to just make the decision, we're only going to sell these to young people, and we're going to help them in that.
They just don't do it for some reason.
Yeah. And if we did that, we'd have such a positive impact on our wider society by saying, firstly to our young people, no, stay. You've got a great future here.
Has a knock-on effect, mate, to people's mentality, right? You look around and you say, actually, my government does care about me. That's a rationale to not jump ship. That's a rationale to stay here because they're showing me firsthand that, they've got our best interests. But it sounds like we're drowning. It feels like we're drowning. So for Reform Jersey, then, I guess, is you're saying, I don't have the keys to the answer, but I hopefully want to put the foundation blocks in place that over a certain amount of time I can change the trajectory and we can sort of bring it back a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that
the more equal a society we are, and the more that we work for the interests of the majority of people here and are not constantly kowtowing to vested interests, I think we would end up living up to our potential much more. If ordinary working people here are wealthier than they are now, that money will circulate through the economy. Shops will benefit from it because people have got more disposable income. People will be able to afford to enjoy going on a night out or going to restaurants or what have you. Those businesses will benefit from it. Whereas if every time Jersey seems to generate wealth, it just goes to a handful of millionaires who've already got plenty of wealth, we can't be surprised that doesn't permeate through to the rest of society. And, oh, great, the company I work for is doing brilliantly. It's grown, it's making all this money. Oh, by the way, your pay rise is going to be less than inflation, which means it's a pay cut in real terms. Or your rent's going up, your food bills are going up. So even though you might work somewhere that's doing well, if you're not feeling it, why do you care? Why would you care whether your business is doing well or not if you're personally not feeling the benefit from it? So if you change that dynamic and make people feel more invested in their community and their economy, they'll be willing to do more to give back to it. Just a silly little example here. Jersey has an honorary police system where for hundreds of years we've had people who volunteer as police officers do it completely free of charge, and that worked very well for decades. Some parishes are really struggling to get people to volunteer to do those roles. And I think it's because a lot of people just don't have the time or money because they're having to take that second job on because they're so knackered after their first job or main job. Fewer people want to volunteer to do something in their communities. And the fewer people who volunteer, the more people you need to pay to do the job instead, which means we're having to spend more money on that. So if people have got more economic freedom, they'll be more involved culturally and socially as well. And that will make Jersey a nicer place to live and work beyond just the stuff we can spend money on. It's the human stuff that will benefit from it too. And if you're paying half your income to rent somewhere and struggling to afford your food bills, don't be surprised when that person doesn't take part in much else beyond that.
Yeah, that's true. The pay rise concept is quite flawed at the moment, isn't it? Because they announce that you get a pay rise or whatever, but if food and everything else and rent's gone up just as much, you haven't got a pay rise. You've stayed on the same wage.
Yeah, exactly.
A pay rise would insinuate that you have more money left over, or you have more money at the end of the month. But if you're, you might get more every year. But if you're paying more, and even if that more expends than what you're getting paid, then like you just said, it's a pay cut.
Yeah.
So I guess I know you said you're optimistic, but are we on some sort of time limit? Is it going to get to a place where is it an act now sort of thing? Do we, how much more time can we spend on messing around? Is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a really good question. I am worried that Jersey will face a terminal decline if nothing happens. And there'll come a point where it becomes irreversible. When we lose too many people, when the economy shrinks because of people leaving it and taking their money with them, that there comes a point where it's even harder to reverse. So at some point it does have to reverse. We can't constantly have growing inequality, because if you have growing inequality forever, eventually that means one person owns everything and everyone else owns nothing. At some point that has to reverse and us become more equal. I am extremely worried that in the next couple of years things will get worse on some fronts because of that government complacency, who just aren't really doing much. And when they do the odd positive thing, it really is just tinkering at the edges. So from my perspective, we're kind of looking at the long game here. So if Reform Jersey does well at the next election, there's all sorts of stuff we can do to try to reverse some of these trends. But that next election is not for another 2.5 years. A lot could get worse in that time. At the last election, so the 22nd of June last year, was the best night of my life.
Yeah.
Because as the results came through, we found we had done better than we'd ever done before, better than we were expecting to do. We went from having 5 Reform Jersey members to having 10. In one go, we doubled like that. And I kind of think if we can build on that momentum, keep going and keep bringing people in, then there is a genuine chance that we could win outright next time and not have to contend with the personality politics or the individuals who aren't clear about which way they're leaning on anything. And if we got to that point, we could walk into the government office with our manifesto, hand it over to the civil servants and say, right, this is our blueprint. We work on this from day one now. We don't have to spend millions of pounds on consultants telling us what to do, because we already decided. It's already in the manifesto. And we could do a lot of good reasonably quickly if we got the opportunity. But things can get worse in 2.5 years, and I think we ought to brace ourselves for that. But, sometimes things have to get worse before they get better.
Yeah, most definitely. So maybe that will be the switch for people to say. Mm-hmm. So I guess from a public perspective, is there anything that, if someone's listening to this and they say, actually, I like everything that Sam said, mm-hmm. I kind of want to get behind that, what can they do? Mm-hmm. Is there anything they can do before that 2.5 years to show support? Or?
Yeah, definitely. So we're a members-led organisation. Our members join the party. Most of the people who actually run the party as an organisation are not states members. They're volunteers. So, we have a treasurer, for example. We've got an equalities officer. We've got a youth branch, that kind of thing. So the more talent and people who are prepared to give a little bit of time we get involved in, that means we can do more. Fundraising is really important. When the next election comes, we'll need to pay for leaflets and posters. So the more that we have for that, the more we can do. But also, and I say this to as many people as I possibly can, a lot of people look at politics and would instinctively not want to put their own name forward to take part in it. Some of the best politicians that I've worked with have been the people who we really had to work hard on to convince them they were good enough. Some of my colleagues, you could tell in their heart they wanted to run, but they kind of lacked the self-confidence to do it.
Sure.
But when we worked with them and said, no, it's because you lack the self-confidence at the moment why you should be doing it. The worst politicians are the ones with the egos who think they're brilliant and think they're better than everyone else. It's the ordinary people who have good intentions and a good heart, but don't necessarily think they're the right, they've got the skills to do it. We can work with those people. We need more ordinary working class people in politics. And we're lucky with our team at the moment. We've got people from quite a wide variety of backgrounds. We've got somebody who was working as a carer before the last election, somebody who's run a really successful business, teachers we've got working with us. So there's other professions I'd like us to go out into. I'd like us to have more finance workers,
Right.
for example, because we need people who understand numbers
Yeah.
as part of the team. I'd like to see us have more people who've got healthcare experience as well.
Sure.
People who've worked in the health system, because that's a really important area. That would be great for us. So the main thing people can do is they can join us, or at the very least follow us, and try to keep up and pay attention to what's happening. But in the next couple of years, we are going to do more events. We'll invite people to come and hear from people when we're doing our campaigns. We want to try to get out into communities as well. There are loads of estates on the island where, because we're 10 years old, but that's still relatively new in the full context of Jersey politics. There's still lots of places in the island we've physically not been able to get to. So I represent St Helier. I know our communities across St Helier really, really well. I know where the residents groups are. I know where to go if I need to find things out. I've got lots of contacts around the place. I don't have that in Trinity, but I bet you there's lots of people in Trinity who would, if somebody took the time to go and visit them and knock on their door and say, we're from Reform Jersey and we just want to talk to you about the issues that you're concerned about at the moment.
Sure.
I bet you there'd be people who'd be up for that.
Definitely.
But the more people we have involved in that in different communities, the more we can make the case, and we can tell those people what our policies are, but they can tell us what they're concerned about, and we can build that into our policies as well. So that's the main thing. Sign up, follow.
Sign up, follow.
All of that, yeah.
And then what would I just think, I'm trying to ask from like a working class sort of perspective, what would working with you or helping you sort of look like? And I don't mean like the contents of a role. Yeah. I'm talking from like maybe a time consuming perspective, because somebody who's working class might think to themselves, I'm up for getting involved, but obviously I'm working 8 hours a day and I don't have the time to give my attention to this, as well as my kids and my family and my own personal job. Yeah. So would it be like a massive hindrance on your day-to-day, on your time, or?
No, not at all. I think one of the most important things that people can do is to just advocate for us. If you're at the pub having a few drinks with your friends and something political comes up, don't be scared to say, I think Reform Jersey have got it right on this, actually. Obviously don't be obnoxious about it or preaching or annoying people. But for us, when we first founded 10 years ago, there were voices in the media who mocked us relentlessly. These people are dangerous. These people are stupid. They just don't get it. That's not how we do things here in Jersey. They won't last. 10 years later, not only have we lasted, but we're doing better than ever. For those people who are out there who don't like what we stand for and want to argue against us, we need our own foot soldiers who are just comfortable saying, well, actually, no, I disagree. I think they are doing the right thing. And I agree with what they said on this particular topic. So maybe we should support them more than that. And just normalise people having political conversations, people feeling like they can express their opinion and they're not offending anybody by having a view on something. And just making that more a part of our culture.
Right.
That's really important. And we see that in other countries that have party politics. In the UK, because of their party politics, there are families that know we're a Labour voting family or we're a Conservative voting family. And there are places where when you turn 18, your parents grab you and take you to the polling station and they say, right, we're a Labour voting family, you're voting Labour. And that can create lifelong Labour voters, or it can create rebels who don't like what their parents stood for, and so on principle they'll do the opposite. But at least they're thinking about it and making a judgment like that. We need to build that culture in Jersey where talking about politics is normal, having views is normal, and you can't be shouted down for saying, well, actually, no, I think things could be better, and I think it'd be better if we did this.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to take any time. Just be an advocate.
Be an advocate, be a little bit more vocal. I know what you're saying. You're trying to say, like, sitting on the fence doesn't help anything, Either choose a side or get involved to some sort of degree. But it's funny what you're saying before. It's a tale as old as time, isn't it? Anyone that's people say, they won't be around for long, or he's just here to try be disruptive. It's anyone that's ever told the truth has always had a target on their back, man.
Yeah. So one of my favourite quotes is from a politician called Tony Benn. Honestly, I'd highly recommend looking him up. He was a wonderful guy. He was an aristocrat who gave up all of his titles so that he could represent the people. Amazing man. But what he said, for anyone who advocates change, first they tell you you're mad, then they tell you you're dangerous, then there's a pause. Then after that, you can't find anyone who ever said they disagreed with you. He's so right on that.
Yeah, mate. And that's sort of happening to you, right?
Yeah, oh no, indeed, yeah. And the great example of this is the living wage. 10 years ago, we were the ones saying the minimum wage ought to be set at a level that's enough for people to live on. And we were constantly told, no, that will just cause unemployment. No, businesses will go under because of it. Today, it is the official position of the government of Jersey that they're going to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And okay, it's taken us 10 years to get there, but it's only because of the obstinacy of a handful of us in Reform Jersey who just would not let the subject drop. And eventually we've won people over. It's a great example. We were honestly told, oh yeah, you're mad, you're dangerous.
Yeah. A great example. And it's the proof, right? If today is the day, it's the proof, like you just said, because you kept in the ear, and you finally have seen change. And sometimes that's what it's take. It's not letting it go. You have to be driven with it. You have to be like, look, I know you'd like me to back down, but I'm not going to this time. And the more vocal you are, and the more, even with support and stuff like that, change happens a lot quicker. Cool. So I thought, before we wrap it up, mate, I thought it'd be nice to see people to see you as, not just a politician as well, as Sam Mezec. So what do you get up to in your own life? What do you like doing? I've seen you walked in with a Ghost t-shirt. That's a good band.
Music is everything. Honestly,
you're in the right house, mate.
Absolutely. I started playing guitar when I was about 13 years old, and I pretty much haven't put it down since then. I play in a local band over here. We try and do as much as we possibly can. We play off island quite a bit as well.
Nice.
Yeah. I've played in France, played in Guernsey quite a lot. We've got quite a big following there as well. Life's not about money. It's about the things that make you feel good and the things
what you enjoy.
Absolutely, and music's a huge part of that. I've kind of been into heavy rock music for most of my life. I'm into other stuff as well. But yeah, that's my release. If I didn't have that, I don't know what I'd do. I'd just be so bored all the time. I'd probably go mad from, having work and not other things. Some people get their pleasure out of sport, and that's great. I go watch the Jersey Bulls most weekends, so that's a big part of my life as well. But heavy metal music, hard rock, playing guitar, man, it's freedom.
It's escapism, freedom. Isn't it? It's pure escapism, and it's cathartic, and it's like I'm the exact same, mate. I get up, I start listening to albums straight away. I learn the guitar. I can play the guitar a bit as well, and it's been like that for me my whole life, mate. It's like whenever I felt either alone or excluded, or even excluded myself, I'm in my room or whatever, I've not got anything to do, I just have turned to music, covered in music tattoos. Like it's just, music is life, mate. And I'm the exact same as you. Do you have some favourite bands then?
Growing up, my family were into your classic rock bands. Queen was a band that you weren't allowed through our front door unless you were massive fans of Queen, and that was a big part of my life as well. My dad was big on Bob Dylan, so that permeates me. Bob Dylan. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Massive Bob Dylan tattoo. I'll show you it after here. We love Dylan in this house.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some of the bootleg stuff as well is some of his best stuff. And I think when I turned 13 and kind of really got into rock music, I then kind of expanded a little bit into heavier stuff as well. Ghost is a Swedish heavy metal band that I'm absolutely crazy about. Absolutely love them.
Cool.
But yeah, so that kind of stuff. I have to say I do quite like some of the cheesy stuff as well. Some of the glam rock stuff. The Darkness were huge when I was a teenager, and I loved that.
He's got a podcast now, Justin Hawkins.
He does.
Justin
Hawkins Rise Again. Yeah. No, I listen to that every now
I'll just be 1 second. I think I locked the door, and I think that was random. That's never happened since I've lived here, and it's someone who wanted to test the fire alarm.
Right, fair enough.
Ghost are great, and they're getting a lot popular at the moment.
So we've so my band writes music as well. We've got an EP that we released a few years ago, and we've been desperately trying to finish up a new bunch of tracks that we can put together. And we found the pandemic was really bad for that because we weren't doing a lot. So there wasn't a lot of inspiration on what to write on. And the pandemic was the last thing we wanted to write about. We wanted to write about having fun.
Yeah.
So I think we're finding ourselves in a better place now on that front to get a bit of inspiration for some of the lyrics. We've got a lot of music written, but...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but just need to put the icing on the cake.
What's the name of the band again, sorry?
Flash Mob.
Flash Mob. And have you got any gigs coming up?
We're playing at the Blue Note on the 23rd December.
Probably the best place to play in the island.
I know.
Right?
I'd much prefer to play to a small, cramped crowd than into a massive room that's half empty.
And no one dancing. At least in the Blue Note, everyone's squished together, and they're obliged to get involved because it's so close.
Indeed, I've been worried about the floor in that place.
I see it move. I've seen it move so many times.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Especially when the aircon doesn't work, get people sweating. Brilliant. So the 23rd. So just before Christmas, we'll do that. Then at the end of the month, we're playing. I think we're shortly announcing a gig over here at another venue at the end of the year, and then the next day we're very quickly getting shipped off to Guernsey to play at a nightclub over there. Just come back in time for the new year at that point.
Oh, that's good, man.
Yeah, great stuff.
That's it. It's probably, I guess that would be such a good way to unwind, considering what your day job is and considering what your hobby is. They're quite the opposite ends of the spectrum, so that must be nice.
Nothing better than standing, playing a guitar solo and just enjoying yourself, having a couple of beers.
Yeah, that's it, man.
Nothing better.
And like I was saying to you before, a few of us are going to Download next year, so if you want to let your hair down and come to a festival with us, you're more than welcome.
Absolutely, sounds good.
Cool. Well, we'll wrap up there,
thanks
mate.
a lot, really appreciate it.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I'm glad you came and sat down with me. And the minute I asked you as well, that showed me more trust in you, mate. I sent you a message and said, do you want to come on this podcast? And you didn't have many questions for me, and in quite a professional way, you more or less said, just give me a time and a place. And you came and sat down, which that to me shows someone who's like, trusted and down to earth. So yeah, thank you, man. And this has been a good chat, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Cheers.